What is American Sign Language? American Sign Language, according to the National Institute of Health, is a complete complex language that employs signs made by moving the hands combined with facial expressions and postures of the body. It is a communication option used by people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And you may wonder if sign language is the same for all other countries. And no, it's not. No one form of sign language is universal. Different sign languages are used in different countries or regions. So, for example, British Sign Language is different than American Sign Language. So, there's a little bit of history about sign language and how deaf culture or deaf people experience life today is directly related to how they were treated in the past. So, it wasn't long ago that deaf culture was harshly oppressed and denied even their fundamental rights. The law had labeled them as non-persons, and in some places they weren't even permitted to buy property or marry. Therefore, they were unable to learn or be educated at all. So I'm going to talk about some of the ways that sign language is different than non-hearing impaired cultures. And its most obvious difference is that sign languages are based on the idea that vision is the most useful tool a deaf person has to communicate and receive information. Versus spoken language, words are produced by using the mouth and voice to make sounds. But for people who are deaf, particularly those that are profoundly deaf, the sounds of speech are often not heard, and only a fraction of speech sounds can be seen on the lips. American Sign Language also is completely separate and distinct from English speaking. It contains all the fundamental features of a language, so that means it has its own rules for pronunciation, word order, and complex grammar. So while every language has its own signaling and different functions, they also have theirs. So for instance, if I have a question, rather than raising my hand, a person who is hearing impaired may raise their eyebrows, widen their eyes, and tilt their bodies forward to signify that they have a question. So now I'm going to talk about how sign language is the same as non-hearing impaired cultures. And some of my examples are that non-hearing impaired cultures frequently use body language and gestures to communicate. So just as I do, who is a non-hearing impaired person, I'm able to use body language and gestures to convey a message and get a point across. American Sign Language has regional accents and dialects, so just as a certain English words are spoken differently in different parts of the country, for example, down south they have an accent, American Sign Language has regional variations, so that means that there's different rhythm and singing, like a different kind of form and pronunciation to the way they communicate. Ethnicity and age are also a few more factors that affect American Sign Language usage and contribute to its variety. So this means that they are able to detect someone's age or ethnicity based on the way they pronunciate or contribute to the variety of American Sign Language forms. So now I'm going to talk about some issues and questions that arise in regards to American Sign Language. And one of the most common issues and question is why emphasize early language learning? So according to the National Institute of Health, research has suggested that parents should introduce a child who is deaf or hard of hearing to the language as soon as possible. And just as we discussed in Chapter 8, Touch in the Human Development, the earlier a child is exposed, they will begin to acquire the language, and the better the child's communication skills will become. Research also suggests that the first few years of its life are the most crucial to a child's development of language skills, and even the earlier months of life can be important for establishing successful communication. So a phenomena that I found very interesting throughout my research about American Sign Language is that the NIDCD funded a research in studying, I'm going to try to pronounce it, Al-Sahid Bedouin Sign Language, ABSL, which is a sign language used over the past 75 years. It was used by both hearing and non-hearing people in the isolated village in Israel. And because it was developed among a small group of people, little to no outside influence, and no direct linguistic input, The ABSL offers researchers the opportunity to document a new language as it develops and evolves over time. It can also be used to model the essential elements and organization of natural language. Some advice I can give throughout this research is that sign language is not actually 100% sign language. It's not actually all in the hands either. So just as we discussed in our Chapter 9, the face, humans rely heavily on the human face to receive, gather, and send messages. Also, the eye gaze, as we discussed in Chapter 10, the effects of eye behavior on human communication, slide 15, the disabled and able-bodied strongly rely on eye gazing in order to communicate thoroughly. So I also gathered through Lewis Bentley, who had learned and studied sign language fluently within 3 months, which is really impressive. And what he gathered is that you should have most of your focus on a person's face as they are signing. And of course, their hands are crucial, but facial expressions introduce both important sense to a conversation. So without them, it would be like listening to a monotone conversation in a spoken language, and it would dramatically affect the end meaning. Nonverbal communication greatly contributes to sign language, and really all people can benefit by better demonstrating and understanding strong nonverbal communication skills. According to Virginia Swisher's 1988 article, she had done some research and argued that the study of natural sign languages can enhance our understanding of what language is, and sign languages are different in some ways from spoken languages, but because of its constraints and possibilities afforded by its visuals, they remain fundamentally similar to spoken languages in many ways. And sign languages, like spoken ones, have syntactics, sematics, and morphological and phonological levels of analysis. So a bunch of fancy words for basically saying that they function very similarly.